Chapter 7. The Legacy. In the period following his cremation, many of the monks in Acariya Mun's lineage remained distraught as they continued to feel the loss of their one reliable refuge in life. Like kites with their strings broken, drifting at the mercy of the winds, they wandered off in all directions. Their spirits depressed, they felt like small, helpless orphans who had lost both parents. Consequently, the circle of practicing monks in Acariya Mun's lineage found itself quite unsettled in the immediate aftermath of his funeral. By the time they eventually began to regroup, they had all realized the harmful effects of being without a good teacher. The passing away of an outstanding Acariya is never a small matter. Invariably, it affects the community of practicing monks in a very serious way, shaking them like an earthquake to their very foundations. If his disciples have already established themselves firmly in the practice, possessing the mental fortitude to hold their own while helping to sustain their fellow monks, then the long-term effects will not be so adverse. Whether it's a family leader, a social leader, a business leader, a government leader, or a leader in any branch of the community of monks, the death of a good leader is always felt as a huge loss. Since it is ultimately unavoidable, those subordinates who depend on their leadership should earnestly prepare themselves for such an eventuality so that they may prosper now and in the future. When Acariya Mun passed away, I saw the incredibly harmful effects that such a loss can have. He was only a single individual, but vast numbers of monks and lay devotees were so grieved by his death that they appeared to be left in a state of ruin, like a building whose foundation had been damaged so that its entire structure suffers accordingly. I was shocked by this development, and worried for the future of the circle of practicing monks who could easily suffer damage without the protection of a strong teacher. If we do not make the effort to intensify our practice and get results while our teacher is still alive, upon his death we will be like the living dead, lacking firm principles of our own to hold on to. I myself was caught woefully unprepared at that time. It was a terrible experience. I felt as if the winds of a cyclone were raging through my heart, blowing me in all directions. One storm blew in to assail me with the thought that I had been left stranded without a refuge. Another blew in to fill me with doubts and left me wondering about whom I could possibly rely on now. Then a gale blew through, driving the thought that, having passed away sublimely without any concerns, he had left me behind feeling empty and lifeless, to drift along hopelessly without a mainstay to which I could cling. Yet another wind buffeted me with the thought that everything would come to an end now that he was gone. Who would I stay with now that my father had died? Did this really signal my downfall? No sooner had I begun to stand on my own than my father left me. What a terrible misfortune! Another howling wind inveighed against the miserable bad luck of this poor orphan. I am finished for sure this time, and at such a crucial juncture in my own development as well. The Gileses and Dhamma are engaged in a full-scale war, and Acariya Mun has been my advisor, helping me to work out a battle plan. Who will have this kind of compassion for me in the future? I had never reached such an agonizing impasse before. I felt as though I had fallen into an infernal pit of mortal despair. All hope seemed lost as I lived on without him. Such was my troubled state of mind when Acariya Mun passed away. That experience chastened me. Ever since then, I've been loath to see other practicing monks encounter a similar agonizing experience simply because they lack the firm principles needed to stand on their own. Fearing that they will miss their rightful destiny by default, I constantly warn them of the dangers. Should they wait until the sun is already set before rushing to find a safe refuge, I'm concerned they may end up feeling as empty and lifeless as I did. Not wishing to see this happen, I caution them to hurry and intensify their efforts while the moon is still bright, their hearts still willing, and their bodies still able. Thus committed, those desiring to attain the wealth of virtue inherent within Magga, Phala, and Nibbana can still manage to do so. They need not live poverty-stricken amid a world of spiritual riches. Relics transformed. All the people who received some of the bone fragments that were distributed after Acariya Mun's cremation placed them in suitable reliquaries and worshipped these relics in his stead. Everyone went their separate ways after the funeral, and nothing further was heard about this matter until some 4 years later when Kunwan Komanamun, owner of the Siripon Panit store and the Suttipon Hotel in Nakhon Ratchasima, returned to Sakun Nakhon for a merit-making ceremony. When he presented a cloth offering at Wat Suttawat Monastery, where Acariya Mun had passed away, the abbot gave him a piece of bone taken from Acariya Mun's funeral pyre. Upon returning home, he decided to place it in the reliquary with the other remains of Acariya Mun which he had received 4 years earlier. When he opened the container, he was astonished to find that these bone fragments, received at the cremation, had all been transformed into crystal-like relics. He was so amazed at seeing them that his spirits soared. He quickly sent someone to check on another set of Acariya Mun's remains that he kept in a reliquary at the Suttapon Hotel, and discovered that they too had been transformed into crystal-like relics. A small portion of the original bone remained in the form of a coarse powder, but soon that too underwent the same transformation. In the end, a total of 344 relics were counted in the 2 reliquaries belonging to Kun Wan. This was the first instance where Acariya Mun's remains were found to have transformed into relics. News of this miracle spread far and wide. Soon people began coming to ask him for a share of the relics. Kun Wan was a very generous person, and he sympathized with their request. So he shared the relics out among them 1 or 2 at a time. He very kindly gave me some on 2 occasions. On the first occasion I received 5, on the second 2, making 7 altogether. As soon as I received them, I publicized the fact that I had something very special. I was enormously pleased to have them, but my mouth wasn't satisfied to keep quiet about it. In the end, I lost out. Some women came and took them all. But, oddly enough, I was not at all disappointed that they took advantage of me. And there being nothing left to publicize, my mouth was finally satisfied. When word got out that I had something very special, the first people who came to ask to see them were all women. When I brought out the relics, first this woman picked one up to inspect it, then that woman picked one up to inspect it. Before I knew it, each of them had quietly slipped the one she was holding into her pocket, asking me if she could keep it. Who would dare ask for their return at that point, and make a fool of himself twice? Since then I have never had any of Acariya Mun's relics in my possession. Later, I heard that Kun Wan had given so many of his relics away to other devotees that he had hardly any left, so I didn't dare to bother him again. It is my understanding that Kun Wan's store in Nakhon Ratchasima was the first place where Acariya Mun's bone fragments were discovered to be genuine relics. From that time on, such relics have appeared in many different places where faithful people, who received pieces of Acariya Mun's bone, continued to worship them with special reverence. Even today, people still discover that Acariya Mun's bone fragments have turned into relics, though the families who have them keep very quiet, fearing that others will ask for a share of these rare, priceless gems. In any case, someone who did not have an inherent spiritual connection with Acariya Mun would find it difficult to receive one of his relics to worship. Just look at me. I received several of them, but lacked the merit necessary to look after them. I had to give them to someone else to care for them in my place. Acariya Mun's relics possess many strange, amazing qualities. One person who owned 2 of them made a solemn wish that his 2 relics become 3, so that he would have one for each of the 3 jewels, Buddha, Dhamma, and Sangha. Soon afterward, a 3rd relic materialized with the other 2. Another person with 2 relics made the same solemn wish, but instead of increasing, the 2 fused into 1, which greatly disappointed him. This person told me what had happened and asked my advice. I explained to him that whether one has 3 of Acariya Mun's relics, or 1 of them, or merely a bone fragment that has yet to undergo any transformation, all are essentially relics from his body. So no one should be disappointed if 2 become 1, for it's a miraculous occurrence just the same. What could be more amazing than that? Even the hair samples from Acariya Mun's head, which were collected when he shaved his head each month, and which are now kept and revered by people in many different places, have undergone a transformation similar to the bone fragments. In either case, the result is the same. Undergoing an essential transformation, both become relics. People who have genuine relics of Acariya Mun cherish them so much that they keep very quiet about it. But, if someone inquires skeptically whether Acariya Mun's bones really did become relics, the same people will answer boldly in the affirmative. Should they then be asked whether or not they possess any, they will just smile and say they have so few they couldn't possibly give one away, thus precluding someone from asking. For this reason, it is difficult to find out these days who actually possesses Acariya Mun's relics. Even if they were asked by a monk whom they revere, they would probably give a rather vague answer. So we must sympathize with those who venerate and treasure Acariya Mun's relics. As a living teacher, Acariya Mun was extremely influential. He he had very effective methods for alleviating the mental stress and feelings of anxiety experienced by his followers. Many people have recounted instances when they were determined to commit evil, or their minds were very hot and agitated, or they felt vengeful enough to kill someone, and the mere thought of Acariya Man then was enough to cause these emotions and ideas to subside immediately. It was as though he had doused their flaming hearts with cool water, allowing them to realize their misunderstandings. Their harmful thoughts had simply vanished. The sense of relief they felt made them want to prostrate before him then and there. Many lay followers have testified to this, and surely there are many more unreported cases of devotees using the power of remembering Acariya Man to successfully counter their wrongful intentions. Many monks, as well, have used the power of their faith in him to restrain themselves in accordance with their spiritual calling. During his lifetime, Acariya Man trained countless numbers of people to be good, righteous individuals. At least 40 years of his life as a monk were spent engaged in teaching monks and laity from all over the country. Just think of how many monks and how many lay people must have trained under him in that 40-year period. If we consider only the monks, the disciples who became accomplished in meditation and the way of practice were already numerous. These monks have in turn become acharyas, teaching their own disciples how to develop firm principles for the future. All of this resulted from Acariya Man's pioneering efforts to pass on that knowledge and understanding to others. Without his guidance, they would never have been able to find the right path, to say nothing of teaching others how to practice it. The task of laying a firm spiritual foundation in the heart, so that it is solidly anchored in reason and propriety, is an important and difficult one, far more so than any other seemingly difficult task we've ever done. Spiritual work, like all other work, follows the lead of the heart. In truth, the primary basis for everything we do is found in the heart. The heart is both instigator and director of all affairs concerning good and evil, right and wrong. Being both arbiter and taskmaster in all moral issues, the more the heart learns about itself and its relation to matters of good, evil, right, and wrong, the better equipped it will be to sustain itself in a smooth, safe, and joyful manner. Those of us who were aware of Acariya Man's profound knowledge of this subject feel obliged to pay homage to him with unshakable faith. While he was alive, we were constantly reminded of the depth of his understanding, and although he has now passed away, we have never forgotten it. We cannot help but recollect him with a profound and boundless sense of gratitude. Acariya Man was a teacher of the highest caliber when it came to developing people's hearts, a development that goes straight to the essential core of life in this world. A heart well developed in Dhamma is unlikely to suffer adverse consequences. More than that, we can state with confidence that a fully developed heart will never suffer any adverse consequences at all. All its actions will bring beneficial results. A world in which proper spiritual development keeps pace with material development is a truly progressive world, where people are bound to live in peace and happiness. When the material side of the world progresses at the expense of the spiritual side, people's hearts are forever ablaze, so the world experiences strife, oppression, exploitation, and corruption on a grand scale. Such progress is equivalent to the advance of the fires of hell. If you want to know what the advancing fires of hell are like, you need only look at a world devoid of spiritual development, a world that is constantly polluted by the heart's filthy excretions. When the heart is neglected, people's behavior becomes perverse, immoral, irritating, and quite offensive. So much so that nothing of pleasure or praiseworthiness can be found in a world ruled by impropriety. Understanding this, wise, intelligent people emphasize spiritual development over all other kinds of development, which are all merely creations of the heart anyway. Once the heart has been well developed, its overriding influence then cleanses all aspects of a person's behavior. The world thus enjoys peace and happiness, following the lead of intelligent people who have developed themselves spiritually, and therefore strive to govern society with reason, according to the principles of Dhamma. We should be very wary of admiring or trusting the intelligence of people who lack spiritual development, even if they're so clever that they can explore the sun, the moon, and the stars. Such achievements are not all that significant, especially if the intelligence in question is of the kind that is unmindful of its own misdoings and exudes poisonous elements that cause trouble in society. Applied indiscriminately, this clever knowledge may well lead to behavior rivaling that of common animals that ruthlessly prey on and devour each other, believing all the while that it is a clever way to satisfy their needs. Regardless of our position in society, genuine intelligence is measured by our ability to use the principles of reason to bring prosperity to ourselves and others, and there is no need to earn a diploma to certify it. Thoughts and actions bringing peace and happiness to ourselves and others are considered the true fruits of genuine intelligence, and as such, they constitute their own certificate of recognition. We need not boast of our credentials to verify our intelligence. In fact, such certification may secretly act as a cover for immoral behavior. In that case, the means may be furtive, but the resultant disturbance to others is no secret. The troublesome problems it creates are obvious everywhere we look. Such is the harm that arises when spiritual development is overlooked. Who can seriously believe that material development alone, driven by people whose hearts are corroded by kilesas and corrupted by selfish motives, will ever bring true peace and prosperity to the world? Only someone who is completely insensitive to moral issues could possibly accept this view. The difference between the actions of those who have developed themselves spiritually and those who have not is the difference between day and night. It was for this reason that the Lord Buddha did not recommend that the samadhi attainments be used for such psychic purposes as levitating, diving through the earth, or walking on water. He did not praise the intelligence of people acting like that. On the contrary, he praised as intelligent those who made an effort to thoroughly train themselves in the way of virtue, regardless of whether they were using samadhi attainments or some other means to achieve this. Such people are a blessing to themselves and to others, for a sense of contentment is the primary determinant of how pleasant our world really is. Even though the state of our health and other physical needs may be uncertain, following the fluctuating nature of anicca, life remains pleasant if our hearts have sufficient contentment to insure us against life becoming unbearable. Questions have arisen concerning the spontaneous transformation of the bone remains of Acariya Man and Acariya Sao into relics. As news of this marvel spread shortly after the first relics of Acariya Man appeared, many people voiced doubts about why the bone remains of ordinary people could not also become relics. After all, the bones of an arahant and the bones of an ordinary person are composed of the same body elements. Why is it that only an arahant's bones can become relics? What's the essential difference between the two? Briefly, my own explanation is that the heart, or the chitta, is the fundamental determining factor here. Although the chitta is something common to all living beings, it varies greatly in power and quality from one person to the next. As for an arahant, his chitta is an arya chitta, meaning that it is absolutely pure. The chitta of the average person, on the other hand, is merely an ordinary chitta, meaning that it is polluted by kilesas. In either case, the nature of the chitta, the master and prime mover, has a decisive impact on the condition of the physical body in which it resides. For instance, the arahant's chitta being pure, it may well have the power to cleanse his body elements, making them pure as well, and thus allowing his bones to transmute into relics. Although the body of an ordinary person is composed of the same type of elements, the body's master, the chitta, is full of kilesas. It has no power to cleanse the body elements and purify them. Because the body elements have not been purified, the cremated bones of the average person remain unchanged, reflecting the impure nature of the chitta. We could say that purified elements are synonymous with the Arya Chitta, while ordinary elements are synonymous with the ordinary Chitta. The attributes of the Arahant's Chitta, and by extension his body elements, differ significantly from those of the average person, so their bone remains are bound to differ as well. However, I am not sure that after death the bones of all Arahants will automatically be transformed to relics. The Chitta of someone attaining the level of Arahant is completely purified at the moment of its attainment. The question remains, when the body of an arahant is cremated, do the remaining bones become relics in each and every case, or not? From one arahant to another, there is a considerable difference in time between the moment when he reaches that attainment and the moment when he finally passes away. The bones of living arahants, who maintain their body elements for a long period of time after their attainment, are very likely to become relics after death. This is due to the length of time involved. The chitta of an arahant maintains the body elements by means of the various life-sustaining systems present in the body, like the breath, for example. At the same time, an arahant maintains throughout his daily activities an intrinsic level of samadhi that steadily works to cleanse his body elements until they also become pure. This results in his bone remains becoming relics after he passes away. But I'm not convinced that the bone remains of an arahant, who passes away shortly after his attainment, do become relics, since his body elements were not subject to the same lengthy cleansing process mentioned above. An arahant classified as Dantapanya is one who attains enlightenment slowly and gradually. He may well reach the anagami level, and then be stuck there for a long time before he finally reaches the level of arahant. he must spend a lot of time investigating back and forth between Arahatta Magga and Arahatta Pala before the chitta develops sufficient strength and skill to pass beyond. This process of investigating Arahatta Magga for the sake of attaining Arahatta Pala is in fact an effective means of cleansing the body elements. Having finally attained the level of Arahant, his bones may well become relics after he passes away. On the other hand, I am not at all sure that the bones of an Arahant who attains enlightenment quickly, that is, Kippabhinya, and then passes away shortly afterward, will necessarily become relics, since his purified chitta would have very little time to cleanse his body elements. As for the ordinary chitta of the average person, producing a transformation from bone to relic is well beyond its capability. Not only were Acariya Mun's bone remains clearly transformed into relics, but some of these relics then underwent some amazing changes of their own. As I have already mentioned, someone who had 2 relics made a solemn wish that they become 3, and was rewarded with an extra one. Someone with 2 wished for a third and ended up with only 1 instead. Although it seems virtually impossible, such transformations actually happened. There was another strange case where a man who had been given 2 relics one morning found 3 when he looked again that evening. In the short period between morning and evening they had increased from 2 to 3. The man in question was a senior government official with enormous faith in Acariya Mun. From the day he passed away until the time of his cremation, this man had been extremely helpful in nearly every aspect of the funeral arrangements. A certain senior monk, having received some relics from Kunwan of Nakhon Ratchasima and remembering this man's kind assistance, gave him a pair as a keepsake one morning. The man felt an overwhelming sense of joy the moment he was handed that precious gift. Having nothing suitable to put them in just then, he put the relics in an empty snuff bottle for the time being. He closed the cap tightly and placed the bottle in his shirt pocket, buttoning it for good measure to ensure against loss. Upon leaving the monastery that morning, he went directly to work, where he spent the whole day in a bright, happy frame of mind, his thoughts returning time and again to the relics he had just received. Arriving home that evening, he excitedly told his family that he had received something splendid, a gift he had never received before. After the whole household gathered around to see what it was, he produced a proper reliquary for holding the relics. Opening the snuff bottle to remove the relics, he saw, to his amazement, that there were 3 of them. This sight heightened his reverence for Acariya Mun, and he was so overjoyed at receiving the relics that he could hardly contain himself. He boldly proclaimed to his wife and children that this was a genuine miracle, proof that Acariya Mun was truly an Arahant. His family were somewhat skeptical, worried that perhaps he had miscounted them in the morning. He refused to accept this, arguing vehemently that he clearly remembered being given 2 relics by the senior monk that morning. He insisted that he had accepted them with great interest and respect. Even at work he had kept them in mind all day, repeating to himself, 2 relics, 2 relics, as though it were a meditation subject. How could he have forgotten how many there were? He told his family that if they still harbored any doubts, tomorrow he would take them all to ask the senior monk. Then they would realize that what he said was the truth. But his family didn't want to wait. They were determined to go immediately. So they all agreed to go straight away. Upon arriving at the monastery, the government official asked the senior monk how many relics he had given him that morning. "I gave you 2 relics. Why do you ask? Is one missing?" "No, none are missing. In fact, they have actually increased by 1, so now I have 3. The reason I ask is, when I returned home and opened the bottle to remove the relics and place them in a reliquary, there were 3 instead of the 2 I expected to see. This made me tremble with joy. I quickly told my wife and children what had happened, but no one believed me. Afraid that I had miscounted them, they insisted that I come again and ask you to make sure. Now that we know the truth, I feel even happier. Well, what do you say? Do you believe me now?" His wife smiled and said she was worried that he may have miscounted them, or that perhaps he was just kidding her. She just wanted to make sure. Since it was obviously true, she believed it. She had no intention of denying the truth. At this, the senior monk smiled and explained to her what had happened. "This morning I gave your husband 2 relics. He was always especially helpful to Acariya Mun and the rest of the monks. He gave us invaluable assistance from the time Acariya Mun died until his cremation was completed. I have never forgotten this. So, when I was given some relics by Kunwan of Nakhon Ratchasima, I put a few aside to give to your husband as a keepsake, since they are so hard to find nowadays. Acariya Mun is the first person I have ever encountered whose bones have changed to relics. Though such things are mentioned in the ancient texts, I had never seen the real thing with my own eyes. Now I have seen irrefutable proof. Please keep them in a suitable place and look after them well. Should they happen to vanish one day, Your disappointment will be far more profound than the joy you felt when they increased in number. Don't say I didn't warn you. Acariya Man's relics possess very miraculous properties. When they can increase in number as easily as they just have for you, they can just as easily vanish if they are not properly respected. Please keep them in a prominent, high place and pay homage to them every morning and evening. They may well bring you some unexpected good fortune. I am absolutely convinced that Acariya Man was a monk of the highest purity, but I don't tell people this very often for fear they may think I'm crazy. You see, people tend to easily believe in bad things, but they have difficulty believing in good ones. Consequently, it is difficult to find a good person, but easy to find a bad one. By observing ourselves, we will notice that we too tend to prefer thinking in unwholesome rather than in wholesome ways. When the senior monk finished speaking, the government official and his wife respectfully took leave of him and returned home in an exceptionally cheerful mood. I have mentioned these strange, miraculous properties of Acariya Man's relics so that my readers may ponder for themselves what causes such phenomena to occur. Those searching for scientific proof to authenticate their occurrence will find empirical evidence hard to come by. Since such things are impossible for people with kilesas to fathom, they may not find a shred of evidence to support them. The difference between the body elements of an arahant and those of the rest of us is clearly demonstrated by the fact that an arahant's bones can become genuine relics. As for the body elements of people with kilesas, even the cremated remains of 1,000,000 such people will never produce the same results. Thus it is clear that a living arahant is a human being who is incomparably different from the rest of us. Just the fact that his heart is pure makes him stand out in a uniquely amazing way. His attainment is something that the whole world should respect and revere.